Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are pulling apart a story that I guarantee you think you know. It's the ultimate cultural shorthand.
It really is.
If a small startup takes on Amazon, it's David and Goliath. If an 8-seed team plays the #1 seed, it's David and Goliath. It is, the archetype of the underdog.
It is the story everyone knows, or at least everyone thinks they know.
Exactly. And that's the problem. We've turned it into this secular motivational poster about how the little guy can win if he just tries hard enough.
Right.
But I've got this stack of research here. We're talking the primary text in 1 Samuel, deep theological analysis from the Catechism, commentary from 2 popes, even historical records on the early martyrs, and they all seem to be telling a completely different story.
They are. If you look at the sources, specifically through the lens of divine providence, the underdog narrative it falls apart.
Really?
The mission of this deep dive is to show that David wasn't an underdog. In fact, if you understand what was actually happening, he was the only person on that battlefield with an unfair advantage.
That's a massive pivot from how this is usually taught. Usually it's all about, David had a sling and good aim. You're saying the sources point to something bigger.
Structural and psychological.
Yeah.
The sources argue that David's victory wasn't about ballistics at all. It was about memory.
Memory.
Yes, the ability to remember the right things at the right time. That is the thread connecting King David, the theology of Psalm 119, and even the story of St. Agnes, which we'll get to.
Okay, I definitely want to get to the memory aspect because that sounds like a really distinct psychological take, but we have to set the scene first. We're in the Valley of Elah, 1 Samuel 17.
Right, and to understand David, you have to understand the atmosphere he walked into. The text paints a picture of absolute paralyzing terror.
Total fear.
You have the Israelites on one ridge, the Philistines on the other, and down in the valley you have Goliath.
And Goliath isn't just a tall guy. The text is so specific. He's a specialized killing machine. Bronze helmet, coat of mail, bronze greaves. He is a tank in human form.
Precisely. And for 40 days, he comes out morning and evening to defy Israel. And the reaction from the Israelite army, these are battle-hardened soldiers, mind you, is to flee. The text says they are dismayed and greatly afraid.
So into this situation walks David. And let's be clear about his status here. He isn't a soldier.
Not at all.
He's the little brother running errands. He's bringing cheese and grain to his brothers. Practically speaking, he shouldn't even be part of the conversation.
He's a civilian, a shepherd. But notice the contrast in the source text. Everyone else is looking at the physical reality, the size of the giant, the weight of the spear. David looks at the exact same scene and sees a theological reality.
He asks, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?
That's the spark. To Saul and the army, Goliath is a military problem. To David, Goliath is a blasphemy problem.
But here's where I get stuck on the underdog thing. David manages to talk his way into a meeting with King Saul. And Saul looks at him, a kid, ruddy and handsome, clearly not a warrior, and basically says, you're gonna die. This guy has been fighting since he was a baby.
Right.
Saul is being rational here, isn't he?
Saul's being entirely rational by worldly standards.
Yeah.
He's looking at the metrics, reach, weight class, experience. And this is where we hit that core insight about memory.
Okay.
David doesn't counter Saul with his own physical stats. He doesn't say, I've been working out. He counters with his resume of divine providence.
This is the lions and bears speech.
It is. David says, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And he describes how when a lion or a bear came, he didn't just scare it off. He went after it, struck it, and killed it.
Which is impressive, sure, but how does killing a bear translate to fighting a heavily armored giant?
This is the key. David connects the dots for Saul. He says, the Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of this Philistine.
Ah, I see. So he's not saying, I'm a great fighter. He's saying, I have data.
Exactly. He has a data set of God's faithfulness. This is what spiritual writers call the remembrance of past providences. David looks at Goliath, and he doesn't see a giant. He just sees another beast.
He's downgrading him.
In David's mind, Goliath has been downgraded to the status of a bear.
That's a fascinating psychological shift. If you view the problem as just another bear, the panic just disappears.
And that lack of panic is what allows him to act. But before he gets to the fight, we have this incredible scene with the armor.
Oh, the dress-up scene. Saul tries to put his own royal armor on David.
It's almost a comedy sketch, but the symbolism is, it's tragic, really. Saul is the king. He's supposed to be the champion. He's too scared to fight, so he tries to outsource the fight to David, but insists David use his methods. The bronze helmet, the coat of mail,
And David literally can't walk. The text says he tried in vain to go.
He's incapacitated by the safety the world offers. And this is a massive takeaway from the sources. Saul's armor represents human reliance technology, status, conventional wisdom.
And David realizes that if he wears that, he loses his actual advantage.
He does, so he strips it off. He goes back to his shepherd gear, 5 smooth stones and a staff.
He chooses vulnerability over false security.
He does. And when they finally meet on the battlefield, the contrast is just. It's stark. Goliath is insulted. He sees a boy with a stick. He actually curses David by his gods.
And David's response is probably the best pre-fight speech in history. You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin,
No.
but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts.
And he finishes with the thesis statement of the entire event.
The battle is the Lord's.
The battle is the Lord's. That is the technical pivot. David isn't saying, I hope God helps me. He's saying, this is God's fight. I'm just the instrument.
Yeah, because he believes that.
He does something insane. He runs toward the battle line.
He runs toward the giant.
While everyone else is hiding, David is sprinting toward the threat. One stone sunken into the forehead and the giant falls. And then, crucially, David uses Goliath's own sword to cut off his head.
Which is such a brutal irony. The weapon a Goliath trusted in became the very thing that finished him.
It's a total subversion of power.
Okay, so that's the narrative layer, but we promise to go deeper. The Church Fathers and the Catechism, they don't read this just as history. They see it as typology. Can we break that term down for a second?
Sure. Typology is just a fancy way of saying that people and events in the Old Testament are like shadows or blueprints that find their full reality in the New Testament.
So David is a blueprint.
David is a type of Christ. Think about the parallels we just discussed. David is the anointed king, but he looks like a nobody. He goes out to face the enemy of his people alone. He rejects worldly armor. He looks weak.
Just like Jesus looks weak on the cross.
Exactly. To the Roman Empire and even to the Jewish leaders, the cross looked like absolute failure. It looked like a guy getting crushed by the system. But just like David used a simple stone to take down a giant, Christ used the apparent weakness of the cross to defeat the ultimate giants, sin and death.
This source material from the Catechism, specifically paragraphs 273 and 2570, mentions this paradox of strength.
Yes, it references 1 Corinthians. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. The Catechism points out that true strength doesn't come from muscle or military might. It flows from fidelity to his will. It's what they call providential trust.
But that's the hard part, isn't it? Providential trust. It's easy to say when you're looking back at the story, but when you're the one standing in the valley and the giant is screaming at you, how do you actually maintain that trust? How do you keep your knees from knocking?
That is the million-dollar question. How do you build the interior architecture that can withstand that pressure? And this is where our research took a surprising turn. We have to look at Psalm 119.
I have to be honest, when I saw Psalm 119 in the stack, I groaned. It is the longest chapter in the Bible. It's 176 verses, and it seems so repetitive. I love your law, I keep your statutes over and over. It feels, well, dry.
It feels dry if you read it as a rule book. But if you read it through the lens of Pope Benedict XVI and John Paul II, it completely transforms. They argue that Psalm 119 is effectively the software code running in David's brain.
Okay, explain that. How is a poem about rules a weapon?
Pope Benedict describes it as a canticle on the Torah. He says the psalmist isn't celebrating rules that restrict him. He's celebrating the law as a liberating gift.
Liberating. Most people think of religious law as the exact opposite of liberty.
That's the modern view. But for David, the law was his connection to the source of power. Listen to the text. This is my comfort in my distress, that your promise gives me life. Or later, if your law had not been my delight, I would have perished in my misery.
Perished in my misery. That sounds like someone who is under some serious pressure.
Exactly. The person writing this, in tradition, attributes it to David, is under attack. He mentions snares and persecutors. But his response isn't to panic. It's to meditate on God's word. It's a form of mental conditioning.
So you're saying that when David was out in the fields protecting the sheep, he wasn't just practicing with his sling, he was practicing this immersion.
He was internalizing the reality of God. St. Thomas Aquinas connects this beautifully. He says obedience to the commandments isn't about fear of punishment. It's an act of love. He quotes Jesus. He who has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me.
So the law is actually a relationship.
Right. And that relationship is what creates the lion and bear confidence. If you spend years meditating on, your will is my heritage forever, like Pope John Paul II highlights, then when a giant shows up, you don't feel alone. You feel backed by the creator of the universe.
It's like muscle memory, but for the soul.
That's a perfect analogy. You don't build that confidence on the battlefield. You build it in the quiet moments, in the shepherd fields of your life, by saturating yourself in the truth of who God is. That is the smooth stone in the pocket.
Speaking of unlikely warriors and smooth stones, we have one more source to unpack. And this one jumps forward about 1,000 years. St. Agnes.
St. Agnes, this is such a powerful historical corollary.
For those who don't know the history, Agnes wasn't a warrior king.
No. She was a 12-year-old girl living in Rome around 304 AD.
12. That's middle school.
A middle schooler facing the full weight of the Roman Empire under Diocletian. This was one of the most brutal persecutions in history.
So in this analogy, Rome is the Goliath.
Rome is the Goliath. The state demanded she renounce her faith and her purity. When she refused, the threats were horrific.
I can't even imagine.
They didn't just threaten death. They threatened to drag her to a brothel. They threatened fire. They brought out instruments of torture just to scare her.
A 12-year-old facing that kind of institutional power.
And yet, the accounts, like those from St. Ambrose, describe her as having this supernatural calm. She didn't have armor. She didn't have a sword. But she had that same Davidic confidence.
The sling in her case was what?
Her sling was her purity and her absolute trust in Christ as her spouse. She viewed the threats of the executioner the same way David viewed Goliath, as powerless compared to God.
And ultimately, she was killed.
She was martyred, yes. She was beheaded. But here is the paradox of the gospel again. By dying, she won. She defeated the intention of the empire. She didn't break. And today, the Roman Empire is dust. But Agnes is celebrated every year. Her name means lamb, but she fought like a lioness.
The source material mentions her relics, too.
It does. It notes that her relics are traditionally invoked against spiritual foes. It's that ongoing theme. God uses the weak things, a shepherd boy's stone, a young girl's bones, to shame the strong.
It's a complete inversion of how we think the world works. We think resources, money, political power. That's what wins battles. The stack of research says, no, trust wins battles.
Trust grounded in memory.
So let's synthesize this for the listener. We've covered a lot of ground, from the Valley of Elah to the Roman Colosseum to the theology of Aquinas. What is the practical takeaway here? Because most of us aren't fighting literal giants, and hopefully we aren't facing Roman executioners.
No, but we are all fighting giants. Anxiety is a giant. Addiction is a giant. A crumbling marriage, a terrifying medical diagnosis, financial ruin. These are Goliaths. They shout at us morning and evening, just like the Philistines did. They paralyze us.
And our instinct is usually to find Saul's armor.
Exactly. We try to fix it with control. We try to outthink it or buy our way out of it or distract ourselves. We put on the heavy armor of worldly coping mechanisms.
And it doesn't fit. It just weighs us down.
It never fits. The lesson from this deep dive is that you have to go back to the brook. You have to find the simple stones.
And those stones are?
They are the promises of God found in his words, what we saw in Psalm 119. Your promise gives me life. When you are facing a crisis, you don't need a clever strategy. You need to remember who God is.
You need to remember the lions and the bears.
You have to look back at your own life and say, God got me through that breakup. He got me through that job loss. He sustained me then. He will sustain me now. That active remembrance is what gives you the courage to run toward the battle line.
That's a huge shift. Instead of waiting for the problem to go away, you engage it because you know you aren't alone.
Right. The battle is the Lord's. You just have to show up with your sling.
This has been, honestly, a bit of a wake-up call. I came in thinking we were talking about a children's story, and we ended up talking about the fundamental architecture of resilience.
Is deep waters.
Before we sign off, I know you always have a final thought to leave us with, something to chew on.
I do. And I want to go back to that what-if scenario with Saul's armor. It haunts me a bit. Imagine if David had listened to the experts. Imagine if he had bowed to the pressure, put on the bronze helmet, and walked out there.
He would have been slow, clumsy.
He would have died. He would have tried to fight Goliath on Goliath's terms. So here's the question for you, for the listener. What armor are you wearing right now that you need to take off? What are you clinging to? Whether it's your reputation, your bank account, your intelligence, or your need to be in control that makes you feel safe, but is actually preventing God from fighting the battle for you. Because you can't swing the sling if your hands are full of Saul's sword.
That is a heavy question, but I think it's exactly the right one. Drop the armor, pick up the stones. Thank you so much for guiding us through this. And to our listeners, thanks for diving deep. We'll see you next time.